Legend speaks of a burial ship bound for Helheim, its cursed timbers laden with the wailing souls of the fallen. Among the dead lies a woman, cast into the blazing hold by those who feared her power. But the fires that were meant to be her end became her forge. From the smoldering ruins of betrayal, she emerged transformed, wielding a blade forged in the crucible of the underworld itself, a sword that whispers ancient secrets in the dark watches of night. Now she walks the mist-shrouded fjords, crossing paths with both the living and the dead. The spectral blade guides her through haunted burial mounds and across frozen wastes, each dream-whispered secret revealing a web of betrayal that runs deeper than she ever imagined. But what price must one pay to wield a blade that speaks with the voice of the dead? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The iron sang beneath Sigrid's hammer, each strike drawing out notes only she could hear. Dawn's first light filtered through the smoke hole of her father's forge, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors where countless footsteps had polished the planks to a dull sheen. The pendant at her throat, her mother's last gift, swayed. With each rhythmic blow, its weight a familiar comfort against her skin. "You're early again, daughter." Her father's voice rumbled from the doorway, thick with sleep and the weight of years spent before the forge. "Björn the Steady," they called. Him and steady he was, like the ancient oak that stood sentinel before their home. His massive frame filled the entrance, shoulders broad as an ox's from decades of working metal. "The sword dreams kept me awake," Sigrid answered, not looking up from her work. The blade taking shape beneath her hammer would be her finest yet, a wedding gift for the chieftain's son, though the thought brought little joy. Her father's silence spoke volumes. "You still speak of metal as if it lives." He moved to stand beside her, calloused hands gentle as they adjusted her grip on the hammer. "Some find such talk unsettling. Some find a woman at the forge unsettling," she countered, finally meeting his worried gaze. "Yet here I stand." The village had long accepted Björn's decision to train his only child in the smith's arts, though not without whispers. A woman who could forge weapons was uncommon enough, but one who claimed to hear the songs of steel that bred darker rumors, especially in these times when the old ways clashed with the new Christ God's teachings. Through the open door, she could see the village stirring to life. Smoke rose from cook fires, and the bleating of sheep mingled with children's laughter. The morning fog clung to the fjord's surface like a burial shroud, while longships dozed at their moorings like sleeping dragons. "The metal speaks to you again?" her father asked, his voice softer now, meant for her ears alone. He was one of the few who didn't dismiss her gift outright, though she saw the concern etched deeper in his face with each passing season. Sigrid nodded, running a finger along the cooling steel. "This one sings of victory, but—" She hesitated, feeling the disquiet in the metal's voice. "There's something else, a warning, perhaps, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon." "Mind you keep such thoughts to yourself when you present it to young Eric." Björn squeezed her shoulder. "The chieftain's son may smile at your skill, but he's his father's child. Harald Grimson has little patience for the old magic, less still for those who claim to wield it." She knew he was right. Harald had been chieftain for 15 winters, and under his rule the village had prospered through trade rather than raids. But that prosperity came with a price. The gradual fading of the old ways, the careful distancing from anything that might frighten their Christian trading partners. The iron pendant felt heavier against her breast, its familiar patterns worn smooth by generations of thumbs seeking comfort. Her mother had been a vulva, a seeress, before fever took her to Helheim. Sometimes Sigrid wondered if her own gift, this ability to hear the songs in metal, was her mother's final blessing, or perhaps her curse. A sharp rap at the forge's entrance scattered her thoughts. Dag, the chieftain's herald, stood in the doorway, his usual easy smile nowhere to be seen. "Sigrid Björnsdottir," he said, formal as a frozen fjord. Your presence is required at the Great Hall, immediately." Her father stepped forward, but Dag raised a hand. The chieftain was specific. Only Sigrid. The sword on her anvil seemed to keen softly, its warning song rising to a pitch that made her skin prickle. She caught her father's eye, saw the fear. He tried to hide, and felt her own heart flutter like a trapped bird against her ribs. "Let me clean up at least," she said, but Dag was already shaking his head. "Now, Sigrid. Harold Grimson doesn't like to be kept waiting." She set down her hammer with deliberate care, the tool that had been an extension of her arm since childhood, suddenly feeling foreign in her grip. The morning's peace had shattered like ice in spring thaw, leaving only sharp edges and cold certainty that something had gone terribly wrong. "I'll be back before the sun reaches midday," she told her father, trying to summon a confidence she didn't feel. The old man's only response was to touch the iron pendant at her throat, a gesture of blessing and protection as ancient as the fjords themselves. As she followed Dag up the well-worn path to the great hall, Sigrid could feel the weight of watching eyes from every doorway. The village was awake now, and news traveled faster than spring floods in such a close-knit community. Whatever waited for her in Harold's hall would be common knowledge before the day was out, for better or worse. The morning mist still clung to the ground, wreathing her steps in grey tendrils that seemed to reach for her ankles like grasping hands. Above, ravens wheeled against the lightening sky, their harsh calls carrying hints of prophecy she dared not interpret. The iron pendant burned cold against her skin, and for the first time in her life, its song was silent. The great hall loomed before them, its carved dragon heads seeming to sneer in the morning light. Dag held the heavy door for Sigrid, but didn't meet her eyes as she passed. Inside, the hall's usual warmth was absent despite the crackling hearth fires. Harold Grimson sat in his high seat, his son Eric beside him, along with the village council of elder men. Their faces were carved from winter stone. In the center of the hall lay a broken sword, her sword, the one she'd crafted for Eric's wedding. Its shattered pieces gleamed dully in the firelight, each fragment an accusation. "Explain this," Harold commanded, his voice cutting through the hall's tense silence. He gestured to where his son cradled a bandaged sword hand. "I cannot," Sigrid answered truthfully, her eyes fixed on the broken blade. Its song was wrong now, discordant and painful to her inner ear. This was not the weapon she had forged with such care. "That sword sang of victory when it left my forge." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Harold's face darkened at her words. "Still, you speak of singing steel? My son could have lost his hand when your blade shattered during practice. A blade you claimed was your finest work." "It was." Sigrid stepped closer to the fragments, fighting the urge to cover her ears against their tortured melody. "This metal has been changed, corrupted." "Corrupted?" Eric's voice cracked like a whip. "Or cursed." He stood, displaying his bandaged hand to the crowd. "I felt it, father. When the blade broke, it burned with unnatural cold, like the touch of Draugr fingers." The hall erupted in fearful whispers. Sigrid's heart pounded against her ribs as understanding dawned. This was no mere accident. This was orchestrated. But by whom and why? "We've been patient with your strange ways, Sigrid Björnsdottir," Harold said, rising from his seat. "Your father's reputation bought you much tolerance, but this," he gestured to the ruined sword, "this smells of cider magic, dark workings that have no place among civilized folk." "I forge with skill and honest labor," Sigrid protested, but her words seemed to fade in the hall's growing hostility. "I have never worked curses or dark magic. Yet you speak of singing metal and dream-forged blades," came a new voice. Runa, the trader's widow, emerged from the crowd. Her face was fixed in an expression of pious concern that didn't reach her eyes. "I've heard her, my lord, late at night, chanting the old songs at her forge, songs that should have died with her mother." More voices joined Runa's, a lifetime of whispered fears suddenly given permission to speak aloud. Each accusation struck like hammer blows. She'd been seen gathering herbs by moonlight, talking to ravens, reading omens in the forge flames. Ordinary things transformed into evidence of malevolence by fear and suspicion. "Enough!" Harald's voice cut through the clamour. "Sigrid Björnsdottir, you stand accused of practicing harmful cedar magic, of endangering the chieftain's son, and of clinging to ways that threaten the peace and prosperity of this village." He lifted a hand to forestall her response. "The evidence lies broken before us. The question now is one of punishment." The hall doors burst open, admitting Björn the Steady. Her father's face was flushed from running, his eyes wild as they found her. "What madness is this? My daughter is no witch." "Stand back, old friend." Harald's voice held genuine regret. "The evidence is clear. The Christ priests speak of burning witches, but we are not so cruel here. There is a burial ship prepared for Ulf the Hunter. She will join him on his final journey." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sigrid's feet. The burial ship, a pyre at sea, meant to send warriors to Valhalla. But for the accused, for the cursed, it was a different journey entirely. A one-way passage to Helheim, realm of the inglorious dead. "No!" Björn lurched forward, but strong hands held him back. "She is innocent, she—" "Father!" Sigrid's voice cut through his protests, steady despite her racing heart. "Enough!" The iron pendant at her throat sang its warning song, clear and terrible now. Too late she understood its message. Too late she saw the careful orchestration behind this moment, the suspicious glances, the whispered fears, all leading to this. Harald nodded to his guards. "Take her to the ship. The tide turns at sunset." As rough hands seized her arms, Sigrid caught a glimpse of Runa's satisfied smile, of Eric's averted gaze. The broken sword still lay on the floor, its song now a keening dirge that only she could hear. But beneath that lament, something else stirred, a deeper resonance, ancient and powerful, that spoke of fire and transformation. They stripped her of everything but her simple work dress and her mother's pendant, which she refused to yield even under threat of violence. "Let her keep it," Harald commanded when the guards would have forced it from her. "Let her take that witch token to Helheim with her." As they led her from the hall, the last thing she saw was her father's face, aged a decade in a single morning. His lips moved in what might have been a prayer to the old gods or the new. At this point, what did it matter? Both had abandoned her to flame and fury. The iron pendant thrummed against her skin, its song changing to something she had never heard before, a melody of ending and beginning, of death and rebirth. She held that song close as they marched her down to the waiting ship, knowing it would be her last comfort in the world of the living. Sunset painted the fjord in shades of blood and gold as they led Sigrid to the waiting ship. The vessel's dragonhead prow reared against the darkening sky, its carved eyes seeming to follow her movement across the shore. Ulf the Hunter's body already lay in state upon the deck, wrapped in rich furs and surrounded by the weapons he would carry to Valhalla. Her place would be below, in the shadowed hold where the enslaved and sacrificed were consigned to their fate. They had bound her in a funeral shroud of undyed wool, rough against her skin, but oddly familiar, perhaps woven on her neighbor's looms by hands that had once clasped hers in friendship. The irony sang bitter as blade steel in her throat. Only her mother's pendant remained free, iron warm against her collarbone, despite the chill air. "May the gods judge you fairly," the guard muttered as he helped her aboard, his voice carrying a hint of sympathy that surprised her. She recognized him then, young Halfdan, whose first sword she'd forged just last spring. He wouldn't meet her. Eyes now, the hold gaped before her like a grave, dark wood ribs arching overhead like the bones of some ancient beast. The space below decks was already laid with kindling and oil-soaked straw. The preparations had been made with suspicious haste, she realized. This had been planned well before the sword's breaking. As they secured her within the hold, Sigrid heard the murmur of voices above, funeral prayers mixing with less sacred sounds, the shuffle of feet on wood, the clink of metal, the soft splash of waves against the hull. Through a gap in the planking, She caught glimpses of the gathered village, their faces orange in the light of shore-bound torches. Her father stood apart from the crowd, held back by two of Harold's men. Even at this distance she could see the tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. She wanted to call out to him, to offer some word of comfort or farewell, but her throat had closed around all sound. The ship shuddered as more fuel was loaded, wood and oil, enough to ensure that nothing would remain of ship or occupants come. Morning. The preparations spoke of fear as much as ceremony. They meant to cleanse the village of her supposed corruption through fire and sea. "Send her to Helheim," someone shouted from shore. Other voices took up the cry, fear making them cruel. These were people she'd known all her life, had broken bread with, had forged tools and weapons for, had celebrated and mourned beside. Now they called for her, burning with the same fervor they'd once used to praise her work. A strange calm settled over Sigrid as she heard the first splash of oars in water. They would row the ship out past the fjord's mouth before setting it ablaze, far enough that no ill luck could follow the flames back to shore. The old ways and the new tangled together in this ceremony, neither fully honored but both bent to serve fear's purpose. The funeral shroud wrapped around her shifted slightly in the salt breeze that found its way through the hull's seams. In the dimness, she noticed for the first time the patterns woven into its fabric, protection runes, worked so subtly that only a careful eye would spot them. Someone had chosen this shroud deliberately, but whether as kindness or part of some larger design, she couldn't guess. Above, she heard Ulf's funeral rites begin. The priest's voice competed with that of the village elder, Christian prayers and Norse invocations twining together like smoke. Neither would be meant for her. Those accused of Saedra magic merited no gentle passage to the afterlife. The ship's movement changed as they cleared the fjord's shelter. She felt the deeper roll of open water, heard the change in the wave sound. Against the hull, soon then, very soon, her mother's pendant grew warm against her skin, its heat building until she thought it might burn. The iron song rose in her mind, clearer than she'd ever heard it. Not the familiar comfort melody of her childhood, but something older, wilder. A song of transformation, of fire's purification and water's rebirth, the first sounds of commotion. Above coincided with a surge of heat from below. They'd begun setting the fires. Smoke quickly found its way into the hold, carrying with it the sharp scent of burning pine and something sweeter, herbs cast into the flames for the dead man's benefit. As the heat built, Sigrid felt a strange resonance building with it. The iron pendant's song grew stronger, seeming to draw answering notes from the very bones of the ship. The wooden ribs around her creaked and groaned, but in their complaint she heard something else. Voices, countless voices, the accumulated whispers of all who had died upon the sea. The smoke thickened, but rather than choking her, each breath seemed to draw the voices closer. The funeral shroud's woven runes began to glow with a light that had nothing to do with the growing fire. Its rough wool softened, transformed, becoming a barrier between her flesh and the rising flames. Her mother had once told her that all magic was transformation at its heart, the changing of one thing into another, of moving energy from form to form. As the fire reached for her with hungry fingers, Sigrid finally understood. The pendants. Song reached a fever pitch, harmonizing with the voices in the smoke, with the cry of burning wood and heating metal, with the very substance of destruction itself. She was dimly aware of shouting from above, of running feet and alarmed cries. The fire was behaving strangely, those on shore would later say. The flames burned with unnatural colors, and in their roar some claimed to hear singing, but Sigrid heard only the perfect chord of transformation, the moment when fire and iron, death and magic, fear and fury, all met in a single world-changing note. The funeral shroud wrapped her like a mother's embrace as the ship burned around her, its runes flaring with protective power that she now recognized as her mother's final gift. She was burning, yet she was not consumed. She was dying, yet she had never been more alive. And in the heart of that contradiction, in the space between what was and what could be, Sigrid began to change. Fire became her world. Her universe condensed to heat and light and the endless song of transformation. The ship's hold had become a forge of impossible size, and Sigrid floated in its heart like metal, waiting to be shaped. Around her, the voices of the dead grew stronger, no longer mere whispers, but a chorus that filled her mind with ancient knowledge. Her mother's pendant had melted, but instead of dripping away, the liquid iron flowed over her skin in intricate patterns that burned with cold fire. Each line traced by the metal brought with it fragments of memory not her own, the last thoughts of warriors, the final prayers of slaves, the desperate hopes of sacrifices. Generations of the dead had sailed these waters on funeral ships, and now their collective memory poured into her like molten steel into a mold. "We have waited," the voices sang in her mind, "for one who could hear us, for one who knows the songs of metal and magic, for one who could become the blade." Understanding bloomed like forge fire in her chest. She was not meant to die here. She was meant to be remade. The funeral shroud's protective runes flared brighter, no longer fighting the fire but working with it, guiding the transformation. This was what her mother had foreseen, why she had woven her last magic into this simple length of wool. Above the roar of flames, Sigrid heard the crack of the ship's spine breaking, felt the rush of cold seawater meeting hot wood. The vessel was coming apart, but it no longer mattered. The forged space that contained her had become something else, something older than wood and wave. She floated in a void where the boundaries between life and death, between solid and liquid, between was and would be, had grown thin as autumn ice. The liquid iron that had been her pendant gathered itself, drawing more metal from the ship's fittings, from weapons laid beside Ulf's body, from the very essence of all the blades that had ever accompanied warriors to their final rest. It flowed together before her, taking shape with deliberate purpose. "Take it," the voices urged. "Take it and be transformed." Sigrid reached out, though she no longer knew if she moved physical fingers or merely the idea of them. The forming blade reached back, metal flowing up her arm like living quicksilver. Where it touched, she felt her flesh changing, becoming something that was neither fully human nor purely spirit. The sword took its final shape in her grasp, a weapon of impossible beauty, its blade rippling with patterns that seemed to move. In the light, but it was more than mere steel. This was a blade forged from death itself, quenched in the waters that bordered Helheim, tempered by magic older than the gods. Knowledge flooded her mind as her fingers closed around the hilt, knowledge of ancient battles, of forgotten magics, of oaths sworn and betrayed. The blade was both weapon and witness, keeper of secrets that had died with their bearers, and now it had chosen her to hear those secrets, to act on truths long buried. "You are the blade now," the voices whispered, "and the blade is you. Forged in death's fire, born again in death's water, neither fully living nor truly dead." The transformation reached its peak. Power surging through her changed flesh like lightning through storm clouds. She felt her old self burning away, being reforged into something new. Her senses expanded, stretching beyond mortal limits. She could taste the salt in the air, hear the songs of every piece of metal for leagues around, feel the weight of countless untold stories pressing against her mind. The ship's remains were slipping beneath the waves now, but water held no terror. For her transformed body, the funeral shroud had become a cloak of shadow and mist, its protective runes now worked into her very skin, alongside the patterns left by the flowing iron. She felt the cold embrace of the sea, but it was a distant thing, as if felt through layers of dream. The whispering blade sang in her grasp, its voice clearer than any metal song she had ever heard before. It spoke of secrets and lies, of betrayals hidden beneath centuries of silence. But more immediately, it spoke of those who had orchestrated her death, or rather, her rebirth. The sword knew the truth of the broken blade, knew whose hands had worked that sabotage and why. Images flashed through her mind. Runa the widow, speaking secret words over Eric's wedding sword while Sigrid slept. Harald's son himself, agreeing to the plan that would remove a complication from his future rule. Coins changing hands in darkness, old grievances given fresh purpose. The conspiracy unfolded before her like a smith's diagram. Each piece fitted perfectly to bring about her downfall, but they had unknowingly brought about something else entirely. The gods, old or new, had a different fate in mind for Sigrid, Björn's daughter. She felt it in the blade's song, in the whispers of the dead that now lived in her transformed flesh, in the very patterns of destiny that she could now see woven through the world, like metal threads in a tapestry. "Rise," the voices commanded. "Rise and remember why you were forged." Sigrid felt herself moving upward through the dark water, the whispering blade lighting her way with its ethereal glow. She was no longer merely the blacksmith's daughter who heard the songs of steel. She had become something that walked the boundaries between worlds, a weapon forged to cut through lies, a vessel for truths too long buried. The surface drew closer, and with it came a new purpose. She would return to the world of the living, but not as they had known her. She would come as blade and forge both as justice and memory, as the voice of the dead and the hand of forgotten powers. The moon broke through storm clouds as Sigrid broke through the waves, its light catching on her transformed flesh and the rippling patterns of her sword. She had entered the water as a condemned woman, wrapped in a funeral shroud. She emerged as something else entirely, a figure of mist and metal, of shadow and story, of death's wisdom and life's burning purpose. The whispering blade sang its first clear note into the night air, a sound that carried across the waves to the sleeping village. In their beds, the guilty stirred uneasily, troubled by dreams of iron and fire. Their time of reckoning approached. On feet of forge flame and sea foam, wearing the face of the woman they had tried to burn, the tide drew Sigrid toward an unfamiliar shore, far from the village's watching eyes. Her transformed body moved through water like smoke through air, the ash-stained cloak that had once been her funeral shroud flowing around her like liquid shadow. Each step onto the pebbled beach left no mark, as if she walked the boundary between substance and spirit. Dawn approached, though its light felt different against her changed flesh. She could see the sun's rays passing through her outstretched fingers, catching on the metallic patterns that now traced her skin like frozen lightning. The whispering blade hummed at her side, its song a constant harmony of secrets and memories. "Look," it seemed to whisper, drawing her attention to her reflection in a tide pool. The woman who gazed back was both familiar and strange, her face the same yet transformed, as if carved from pale stone and traced with silver. Her eyes held an inner fire that flickered like forge flames, and her hair moved in currents of air she couldn't feel. The ash-stained cloak settled around her shoulders with surprising weight, its fabric somehow both solid and insubstantial. Like her, it had been transformed in the Death Forge, becoming something that existed between worlds, where the old protection, runes had been woven into the wool. New patterns now shifted and changed, responding to her thoughts and the blade's whispers. "North!" the sword sang softly, pulling her attention toward the distant mountains. "Truth waits in the high places, where old stone remembers what men forget." She took a step, then stopped, startled by how the world shifted around her. Distance seemed to fold like soft iron under a hammer blow, landscapes bleeding into one. Another step, and she stood in deep forest, though the beach had been empty of trees. The blade's song steadied her, teaching her how to navigate this new way of moving through the world. "You walk the spirit roads now," it explained. In its whisper voice, a chorus of dead warriors lending weight to its words. "The paths between places, between moments, learn them carefully." A raven's harsh call drew her attention upward. The bird circled once, twice, then landed on a nearby branch. Its eyes held an intelligence that spoke of Odin's messengers, and it watched her with unmistakable purpose. When it spoke, its voice carried the blade's harmonics. "The living fear what they cannot understand," it croaked, wisdom riding its rough tones. "But you are no longer bound by their limitations. You are become something new, a walker between worlds, a voice for the voiceless, a blade forged to cut through lies." Sigrid extended her hand, watching as morning mist gathered around her fingers, solidifying into what appeared to be normal flesh. With concentration, she could appear almost human, though never quite enough to fool a careful observer. The blade's song guided her efforts, teaching her to shift between her forms as needed. "Show me," she whispered to the sword, "show me what I must know." Images flooded her mind. Ancient battles where oathbreakers fell beneath righteous steel, secret murders hidden beneath centuries of silence, betrayals that had shaped the course of kingdoms. But among these grand tapestries of treachery and vengeance, she saw smaller, closer truths, the careful conspiracy that had led to her own death, the web of fears and ambitions that had condemned her. The raven launched itself from its perch, winging toward the mountains. The blade urged her to follow, its whispers speaking of hidden paths and forgotten shrines where old powers still held sway. She took another step between spaces, learning to trust her new abilities, and found herself standing in a high meadow where stone pillars rose like giant's teeth against the sky. Here the veil between worlds felt tissue-thin. She could see the threads of power that bound earth to sky, past to present, truth to consequence. The ash-stained cloak stirred in winds that blew from other worlds, its patterns shifting to reveal glimpses of other times, other places. "Your first task approaches," the blade whispered, drawing her attention to movement at the meadow's edge. 3 figures emerged from the trees, warriors by their bearing, though their weapons and armor belonged to no single time or place. The dead, she realized, called to battle by her presence. "Test your steel against those who have nothing left to lose," the sword sang. "Learn what you have become." The warriors approached, their forms flickering between flesh and shadow. They carried blades that sang with their own histories, songs of glory and betrayal, of honor and shame. Sigrid felt these songs merge with her sword's whispers, creating a symphony of steel and story. She moved without conscious thought, her transformed body responding to the blade's guidance. The cloak swirled around her like battle smoke as she met their charge, her sword describing arcs of silver fire through the morning air. She fought as if in a dream, each movement perfect and inevitable, the knowledge of countless dead warriors flowing through her. When it was done, the phantom, warriors bowed to her, their forms dissolving like mist in strong sunlight. They had taught her what she needed to know, that she could fight as either solid or spirit, that her blade could cut through more than mere flesh, that she was no longer bound by the ordinary laws of combat or nature. "You begin to understand," the sword whispered, pleased. "But this was merely practice. Your true battles lie ahead." The raven returned, landing on one of the stone pillars. In its obsidian eyes, Sigrid saw reflections of her village, of familiar faces twisted with fear and guilt. The time would come to return, to seek justice rather than revenge. But first, she needed to master what she had become. "There are others," the blade sang softly. "Others who were wronged, whose stories went untold, whose justice was denied. Their tales are written in my steel, waiting to be heard. Will you be their voice?" Sigrid looked down at her transformed hands, at the patterns of power that marked her new existence. She was no longer simply Sigrid Björnsdottir, the blacksmith's daughter who heard the songs of steel. She had been reforged into something both more and less than human, a being of metal and mystery, of truth and transformation. The ash-stained cloak settled around her shoulders like a mantle of responsibility, its patterns showing her glimpses of the paths ahead. There would be time for personal vengeance, yes, but the blade whispered of larger purpose, of older wrongs that needed righting. Dawn's light caught the sword's rippling patterns, sending shadows dancing across the ancient stones. In those shadows, Sigrid saw the shape of her future, and it was as sharp and bright as newly forged steel. In the shadow of an ancient runestone, its weather-worn surface still bearing traces of tales long forgotten, Sigrid felt the whispering blade's song change. The stone itself seemed to resonate with memory, its carved surface glowing with a subtle light that only her transformed eyes could see. This was one of the old places, where history had worn thin the veil between past and present. "Touch the stone," the blade whispered, its voice carrying echoes of countless dead. "See what time has buried." As her fingers met the cold granite, the world shifted. The runestone's worn markings blazed with sudden clarity, each line burning with meaning that went deeper than mere words. This was no simple boundary marker or memorial to the dead. It was a warning, written in runes that spoke of oaths broken and consequences deferred. Images flooded her mind. Harold's grandfather, young and ambitious, meeting in secret with Christian merchants. Gold changing hands in darkness. A promise made to gradually turn the village away from the old ways, to make them more amenable to trade with southern kingdoms. But there was more, a deeper betrayal. The blade's whispers grew urgent, drawing her attention to specific runes. "The village was once a guardian place," the sword sang. "Your people were charged with protecting ancient powers, keeping old. Bargains with forces your accusers now pretend never existed. Your gift with metal, it was no accident. The women of your line were chosen, generation after generation, to forge weapons that could touch both worlds." The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Her mother had never spoken of this, but the blade showed her the truth of it. In its steel, she saw her grandmother, her great-grandmother, centuries of women working metal with songs on their lips and power in their hands. Each had been a guardian in her own way, maintaining the old bargains even as the village's memory of its purpose faded. "The bargains weaken," the blade warned. "The beings of mist and mountain grow restless. Your false trial was merely a symptom of a deeper sickness, a village forgetting its purpose, abandoning its posts, leaving ancient powers unattended." Through the sword's whispers, she saw the pattern of it all. Her gift hadn't marked her as different. It had marked her as chosen, as next in line to maintain boundaries that were now crumbling. Her accusers had unknowingly done more than condemn an innocent woman. They had broken the last thread of an ancient covenant, the runestones. Light pulsed once more, showing her a final truth. Her transformation had been no accident. The powers her ancestors had guarded had responded to the village's betrayal by forging her into something new, a weapon of memory and justice, capable of walking the boundaries her people had abandoned. "Now you understand," the blade sang. Softly, "Your vengeance and your duty are one. The village must be reminded of its purpose, or worse things than false accusations will come calling." Sigrid stepped back from the runestone, its light fading, but its truth burning bright in her transformed mind. She had thought to seek simple justice for herself. Now she saw that justice would require awakening an entire village to its forgotten purpose, before the powers they had neglected came to claim their due. The ghost-light lantern materialized in Sigrid's hand as twilight deepened, its flame neither yellow nor blue, but a color that existed somewhere between heartbeat and memory. The blade had shown her how to summon it, drawing on the same power that let her walk the spirit roads. Its light revealed paths hidden from mortal eyes, trails of luminous fog that wound between the worlds of living and dead. The lantern guides. "Those who guard the boundaries," the blade whispered. "Your grandmothers used it to walk these paths, to ensure no harmful spirits crossed where the veils grew thin." Through the lantern's otherworldly glow, Sigrid saw the landscape transform. Ancient burial mounds dotted the hills like sleeping giants, each one glowing with its own inner light. Lines of power connected them, forming a web of energy her ancestors had once tended. Many of these lines now looked frayed or broken, like poorly maintained forge tools. The sword guided her along one such path, its whispers teaching her the rules of this between place. "Step carefully," it warned. The dead walk freely here, and not all remember their purpose as clearly as we do, as if summoned by the blades. Words, shapes began to emerge from the mist, warriors long fallen, merchants who had died on foreign shores, children taken by winter's cruel hands. They approached her without fear, recognizing in her transformed flesh a kinship with their own state of being, neither fully living nor truly dead. An old woman's spirit drew near, her form more solid than the others. The ghost-light lantern flared, and Sigrid recognized her grandmother's features, though she had died before Sigrid's birth. The spirit reached out, her fingers passing through, the lantern's light like smoke through sunbeams. "The boundaries weaken, child," her grandmother's ghost whispered, voice harmonizing with the blade's song. "The old powers stir. What was bound must be renewed, or chaos will follow. You see it already in the village, fear turning neighbor against neighbor, old truths twisted into accusations of witchcraft." The lantern's light pulsed, showing Sigrid glimpses of other places where the boundaries had failed entirely. Villages, abandoned after malevolent spirits broke through, communities torn apart by supernatural forces they no longer remembered how to control, the price of forgetting their sacred duty. "You wear our power now," her grandmother's spirit continued, "forged into new form by necessity and sacrifice. The lantern will show you where the boundaries must be strengthened. The blade will teach you how to rebuild what was broken. But time grows short, and the hungry ones gather where the veils are thinnest." The ghost-light lantern swung in Sigrid's grasp, drawing her attention to the north. There, the spirit roads converged on a place of deep shadow, where ancient things stirred in their long imprisonment. The blade sang a warning, showing her visions of what might emerge if the weakened boundaries failed entirely. "We will guide you," the sword whispered, as her grandmother's spirit faded back into the mist. "But first, you must remind the village of its duty. Those who accused you must understand the consequences of abandoning their sacred trust. The living and the dead must be brought back into balance." The ghost-light lantern blazed brighter, illuminating the path ahead. Sigrid stepped forward, her transformed flesh allowing her to walk these otherworldly trails as naturally as she had once walked the paths between forge and village. She was no longer simply seeking justice for herself, she was working to prevent a catastrophe that could consume everything she had once loved. The dead watched her pass, their spectral forms bowing in recognition of her purpose. She was their voice now, their agent in the world of the living, forged by fate and fury into something that could bridge the growing gap between what was and what must be. The war horn's cry echoed across the fjord, its deep voice carrying more than mere sound. To Sigrid's transformed senses, the ancient horn's call rippled through both worlds, stirring both living warriors and dead ancestors. The blade at her side hummed in response, recognizing the horn as one of the old artifacts of power, another tool her ancestors had used to maintain the boundaries between worlds. From her vantage point on the cliff's edge, Sigrid watched Harald's men scramble to fortify the village. 3 rival longships had been spotted approaching from the north, their dragon heads cutting through the morning fog like serpents through smoke. But the blade showed her what mortal eyes couldn't see. The ships brought more than just warriors seeking tribute. "The barriers weaken faster than expected," the sword whispered. "The rival clan's arrival is no coincidence. They feel the power shifting, though they don't understand what draws them here." The war horn sounded again, and this time Sigrid saw ghostly figures materialize along the shore, the spirits of warriors long dead, drawn by the horn's call to protect their descendants. But something was wrong. The spirits seemed confused, their forms wavering like smoke in wind. Without proper guidance, without someone to direct their ancient purpose, they were as likely to harm the village as defend it. "Your people once knew how to command such forces," the blade sang. The horn was meant to summon both living defenders and dead guardians in times of need. But now they blow it blindly, not understanding they call to powers they've forgotten how to control. Through the sword's whispers, she saw the truth of the approaching conflict. The rival clan's leader, Bjorn Grimhand, had dreamed of this attack for 3 nights running. In his sleep, voices had urged him to claim this territory, promising him power beyond mere land and wealth. The blade showed her these dreams, showed her the dark shapes that had whispered to him, ancient beings taking advantage of the weakened boundaries to sow chaos among the living. The warhorn's voice echoed a 3rd time, and now the very air seemed to thicken with supernatural tension. Sigrid could see the threads of power that her ancestors had woven into the land beginning to unravel. The approaching ships had crossed some invisible boundary, triggering ancient defenses that no one remembered how to properly direct. They must be stopped, the sword urged, but not through battle alone. The horn calls to both worlds. It must be answered by one who walks between them. Sigrid understood. This wasn't simply a raid to be repelled. It was a test of the village's forgotten role as guardians of the boundary. If blood was shed here without proper ceremony, without acknowledgement of the old powers, it would only weaken the barriers further. The war horn itself seemed to call to her, its voice harmonizing with her blade's song. She saw how it had been, used in centuries past, not just to warn of danger, but to maintain the ancient boundaries. Each blast had once been part of a ritual that renewed the village's pact with the powers they guarded against. "The time comes to reveal yourself," the blade whispered. "Before these fools tear open gates, they cannot close." Mist gathered around Sigrid as she drew the sword, its metallic patterns catching the morning light like frozen lightning. Below, she could see Harold organizing the village's defense, could see the fear on faces that still bore guilt for her supposed death. They would soon learn that there were far worse things to fear than a blacksmith's daughter who heard the songs of steel. The warhorn's call faded into silence, leaving in its wake a tension thick enough to cut. On the approaching ships, warriors readied their weapons, their breath frosting in air that grew supernaturally cold. Along the shore, the confused spirits of the dead gathered in greater numbers, drawn by the horn's summoning but lacking direction. Sigrid raised her blade, letting its song rise in harmony with the echoes of the horn's call. It was time to show both the living and the dead that a true guardian had returned to the boundary lands, one forged in death's fire and reborn with the power to walk between worlds. The storm of battle approached, but with it came the opportunity to begin setting things right. The chief's ring glinted in the strange half-light as Harold raised his hand to command silence among his warriors. The ancient band of twisted gold had been passed down through generations of village leaders, meant to mark those worthy of maintaining the boundaries between worlds. Now it sat cold and powerless on his finger, its true purpose forgotten, but not to Sigrid's transformed sight. "The ring remembers," her blade whispered, "even if its bearer does not." Sigrid materialized from the mist before Harold's assembled. Warriors, her ash-stained cloak swirling around her like smoke. Men who had known her since childhood recoiled at her transformed appearance, at the metallic patterns that traced her skin like frozen lightning, at eyes that burned with forge fire light. "Draugr!" someone shouted, but Harold raised his ring hand. Again, squinting through the supernatural twilight that had descended over the shore. "No," he said, voice thick with recognition and fear. "Sigrid Björnsdottir." The blade sang in her grasp, its whispers rising to fill the unnatural silence. Through its power, she could see the ring's true nature, how it had once channeled the authority to command both living warriors and dead guardians, how it had bound its bearers to sacred obligations now abandoned. "You wear the ring of guardians," she spoke, her voice carrying harmonics that made hardened warriors shiver, "but you've forgotten its purpose. You call to powers you no longer understand." Behind her, the confused spirits of dead warriors writhed, like smoke in wind, drawn by the warhorn's call but lacking direction. Ahead, Bjorn Grimhand's ships drew closer, their crews enchanted by darker powers that whispered false promises. What we understood, Harold answered, struggling to maintain his authority, was that you practiced forbidden magics, that You understood nothing, Sigrid cut him off, the blade's song rising with her anger. You chose ignorance over obligation, fear over duty, and now your weakness draws things best left sleeping. As if summoned by her words, a cold wind swept the beach. The ring on Harold's finger flared with sudden light, responding to the presence of ancient powers stirring beneath the waves. His face went pale as knowledge flooded through the ring's awakened magic, knowledge of what his line had once been, of oaths sworn and duties abandoned. Impossible, he whispered, staring at the ring as if seeing it for the first time. These are just stories. Stories carry truth, Sigrid answered, advancing. The spirits of the dead fell into formation behind her, responding to her authority as one who walked between worlds. Your grandfather knew. He chose to forget, to trade ancient obligations for southern gold. But the powers we once guarded, remember. And they grow restless. The blade showed her more, showed her Harold's grandfather making deals with Christian merchants, deliberately letting old knowledge fade, choosing profit over sacred duty. The ring had grown steadily weaker with each generation, its power dormant, but not dead. A cry went up from the watchman. Bjorn Grimhand's ships had crossed the outer boundary, and with their passage, something else stirred. Dark shapes moved beneath the waves, and the very air grew heavy with supernatural presence. "Choose now," Sigrid commanded, raising her sword. Its light cast strange shadows, showing the assembled warriors glimpses of the spirit world that pressed close against their own. Acknowledge the old obligations, or watch everything you love consumed by powers you rejected. The ring blazed, brighter on Harold's finger, its ancient magic recognizing the authority in her transformed flesh, in the blade that sang with the voice of the dead. He looked from the ring to the approaching ships, to the darkness gathering beneath them, and Sigrid saw the moment understanding finally broke through generations of willful ignorance. "What must we do?" he asked, and for the first time since her return, she heard real humility in his voice. The sword song rose triumphant as Sigrid stepped forward to take her place as teacher and guardian, to begin rebuilding what had nearly been lost. Behind her, the spirits of the dead stood ready, waiting to defend their descendants once more. Before her stretched the task of awakening a village to its forgotten purpose, beginning with the man whose ring had once commanded the very powers he had denied. The sacred grove medallion appeared in the air before Sigrid, spinning slowly like a compass seeking true north. Its bronze surface was green with age, yet the runes etched into its face gleamed as if freshly cut. The blade had led her to this artifact, hidden for generations in the hollow of an ancient oak that marked the entrance to a valley no living soul remembered. The wise women of old wore such tokens, the sword whispered. They used them to find places where the worlds grew close, where wisdom could be gained from those who walked the shadows between life and death. As the medallion settled in her palm, its weight familiar, though she had never held it before, the hidden valley revealed itself. The veil of mist that had concealed it parted like a curtain, drawn aside by unseen hands. What lay beyond stole the breath from Sigrid's transformed lungs. Stone circles rose from the valley floor, their weathered surfaces covered in runes that glowed with the same otherworldly light as her blade. Between them, paths of luminous energy wove patterns that her new sight recognized as the foundations of the boundaries her people had once maintained. At the valley's heart stood a great ash tree, its branches reaching into both the physical world and realms beyond. "Welcome, blade bearer," spoke a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. From the shadows beneath the ash tree emerged a woman, or something that wore a woman's shape. Her form shifted like smoke in wind, sometimes appearing as a young maiden, sometimes as a crone crowned with wisdom. The medallion grew warm in Sigrid's grasp as the blade sang in recognition. "The last of the true Vola," it whispered. "She who keeps the old knowledge until one worthy could be forged to bear it. You know me," the figure said, now appearing as a woman of middle years, her eyes deep with ancient knowledge. As I knew you would come, when the boundaries began to fray, and the hungry ones started testing their bonds. The medallion pulsed in time with the wise woman's words, each beat revealing more of the valley's true nature. This was no mere meeting place. It was a nexus, a point where the barriers between worlds could be strengthened or sundered. The stone circles were anchor points, the ash tree a living lock holding powers in check. Your transformation was no accident, the wise woman continued, moving between the stone circles with fluid grace. When the village abandoned its duties, when the old ways were traded for southern gold, the powers we once guarded began seeking a new champion. You were chosen long before they burned you. The medallion spun again, faster now, and in its turning, Sigrid saw truth. Her gift with metal, her ability to hear the songs of steel, these had been preparations. The fire that should have ended her had instead completed a transformation, centuries in the making. But why? Sigrid asked, though the blade was already showing her glimpses of the answer. Because what comes cannot be fought with steel alone, the wise woman answered. The hungry ones grow stronger as the boundaries weaken. They whisper to the living, drawing them into conflicts that will tear the last barriers down. Your rival chieftains' dreams of conquest, their doing, the fear that turned your village against you, their influence. The medallion's spinning slowed, and in its still surface, Sigrid saw reflections of what could come, ancient beings breaking their bonds, the dead walking without guide or purpose, the ordered worlds dissolving into chaos. But she also saw hope, herself standing at the boundaries, the blade in one hand, the medallion in the other, rebuilding what was broken. You are no longer simply the blacksmith's daughter, the wise woman said, her form settling into that of a warrior priestess. You are become the boundary itself, forged in death's fire, tempered in ancient power, shaped to stand between what was and what must not be. The medallion flared one final time, its light joining with the blade's song to show Sigrid the full scope of her purpose. She was not meant merely to seek justice for herself, nor even to awaken her village to its forgotten duties. She had been remade as a guardian of the very boundaries of reality, a living weapon against chaos itself. The shattered shield hung on the great hall's wall, its splintered surface catching firelight like broken dreams. To mortal eyes, it was merely a battle trophy, taken in some forgotten raid. But Sigrid's transformed sight revealed its true nature, a physical manifestation of broken oaths, its every crack a record of betrayals that had weakened the boundaries between worlds. "Touch it," the blade whispered. "See what the shield has witnessed." As her fingers met the ancient wood, the hall around her transformed. She saw it as it had been 3 generations ago, when her accuser Runa's grandmother had served as handmaiden to Harald's grandfather. The shield hung whole then, its surface painted with runes of warding that actually worked, before the old magic began to fade. "Watch," the sword sang. "Watch how betrayal breeds betrayal." The scene unfolded, like iron flowing in a mold. Harald's grandfather, young and ambitious, meeting in secret with Christian merchants. But now Sigrid saw what the blade had been trying to show her. Runa's grandmother was there too, listening. From shadows, learning secrets that would pass down through her line. "Your death was planned before your birth," the blade revealed. "They feared another woman would rise with power to maintain the old ways." The shield's surface rippled under her touch, showing her more recent betrayals. Runa, continuing her grandmother's work, watching Sigrid grow into her power with metal. Eric, the chieftain's son, agreeing to the plot that would remove a threat to his future rule. But beneath these personal treacheries lay something darker. They made bargains of their own, the sword whispered, as the shield showed her visions. Of Runa performing secret rites, not to the Christian god, but to older, hungrier powers. In destroying you, they thought to curry favor with forces they barely understood. The shield's fragments showed her the full web of conspiracy, how Runa had manipulated Eric's fears, how she had whispered to Harald about the dangers of old magic, how she had carefully cultivated the village's growing distrust of anything that spoke of ancient powers, all while conducting her own dark rituals, offering sacrifices to things that waited in the spaces between worlds. "Your trial was no accident," the blade sang. "It was the culmination of generations of planned betrayal. They thought your death would finally sever the old bonds, leaving them free to make new arrangements with powers better suited to their ambitions." The shield's surface darkened, showing her what would have happened if their plan had succeeded, if she had truly died. In the burning ship, the barriers, already weakened, would have collapsed entirely. The hungry ones would have emerged, wearing the faces of those who had betrayed their oaths, wielding powers that would have consumed them from within. But they failed, the sword whispered with grim satisfaction. "Instead of destroying the last guardian, they forged you into something stronger." The shield's fragments trembled as Sigrid pulled her hand away, its broken surface now reflecting her transformed appearance, like shards of truth finally revealed. She saw herself as she had become, a being of metal and mystery, of justice and judgment, forged in betrayal's fire to become betrayal's doom. "They must be exposed," the blade urged, "not just for vengeance, but to show the village the true cost of forgotten oaths." The shield's pieces caught the firelight again, but now each fragment seemed to whisper with voices of the betrayed dead. They called for justice, yes, but also for restoration, for the rebuilding of broken bonds, for the renewal of ancient obligations. Sigrid drew her blade, letting its song rise in harmony with the shield's whispers. The time had come to confront not just individual betrayers, but generations of calculated treachery. She would show them what their broken oaths had wrought, and what power truly looked like when forged in the fires of their betrayal. The shield's fragments cast her shadow on the hall's wall, but it was no longer the shadow of a simple blacksmith's daughter. It was the shadow of judgment itself, come at last to call the oath-breakers to account. The alliance banner unfurled in the pre-dawn air, its surface shimmering with more than mere thread and dye. Sigrid had woven it herself, using skills taught by both the blade's whispers and the wise woman's guidance. Into its fabric, she had worked runes of binding and belonging, creating a standard that could rally both living warriors and dead guardians to a single cause. "They come," the sword sang softly, "those who remember the old ways and those who wish to learn them again." From the east came her father, Björn the Steady, leading a group of villagers who had begun to question the changes of recent generations. Among them were young smiths who had heard their own faint songs in metal, mothers who had seen truth in dreams, elders who remembered fragments of the old stories. The banner's runes brightened as they approached, recognizing their awakening. Connection to ancient powers. From the west came those who had fled the village in years past, when the pressure to abandon the old ways had grown too strong. The banner's light caught on tokens they carried, preserved remnants of forgotten rituals, hidden tools of power, sacred objects passed down in secret. Each item sang its own song of remembrance and return. And from the shadows, the blade whispered, "Come those who never truly left." The air thickened as spirits emerged from the mist, ancestors and guardians who had maintained their watch even after the living forgot them. They gathered around the banner like moths to flame, their forms growing more solid as the runes acknowledged their presence. Among them, Sigrid recognized faces from the village's history, previous völler and craftsmen, warriors and wise ones, all who had kept their oaths beyond death. "Show them," the sword urged. "Show them what they must become." Sigrid raised the blade, letting its song harmonize with the banner's power. Her transformed flesh caught the light like forged metal as she began to teach what she had learned. She showed them how to see the boundaries between worlds, how to recognize the signs of weakening barriers, how to channel the power that still ran through the ancient sites. The banner's runes shifted and changed as understanding grew among her gathered allies. Each person's awakening awareness strengthened the fabric of reality itself, rebuilding connections that had been allowed to fray. The dead offered their knowledge, the living their determination, and Sigrid stood between them, forging them into a force that could stand against chaos. But some will resist, the blade warned, showing her visions of Runa preparing her own. Dark rituals, of Eric gathering those whose ambitions aligned with forces best left bound. They have tasted power of a different kind and will not easily surrender it. The banner snapped in a wind that blew from nowhere, its runes flaring with sudden urgency. Through its power, Sigrid saw the approaching confrontation, not just a battle between factions, but a struggle for the very nature of reality in their corner of the world. The hungry ones were gathering strength, drawing power from every oath broken, every tradition abandoned, every boundary weakened by ignorance or greed. "We must be ready," she told her assembled allies, her voice carrying harmonics that touched both living and dead. The village's betrayal of its purpose has drawn the attention of powers that should have remained forgotten. If we cannot restore the ancient boundaries, there will be nothing left to fight over. The banner's light caught on faces both solid and spectral, showing her the weight of her words' impact. These were not just followers gathering to support her cause. They were the first new guardians of an ancient trust awakening to their inherited purpose. "The time comes," the blade sang as Sigrid raised the banner high, "to remake what was broken, to restore what was lost, to remember what was forgotten." Around her, the gathered living and dead stood straighter, feeling the power of unified purpose flow through the banner's runes. They were no longer simply villagers and spirits, but a force for restoration, a gathering of those who would stand at the boundaries between ordered reality and encroaching chaos. The banner flew proud against the lightening sky, its runes promising victory, not through force alone, but through the reawakening of ancient truth and sacred obligation. The Worldwalker's compass spun in Sigrid's palm, its needle ignoring mundane. North to point toward paths no mortal eyes could see. Ancient bronze gleamed within a fire as it revealed the spirit roads, ancient highways that connected sacred sites, burial grounds, and places of power. These were the paths her ancestors had walked to maintain the boundaries between worlds. "The way's open," the blade whispered, "but choose carefully. Some roads lead to places best left undisturbed." Behind her, her gathered army waited, living. Warriors carrying weapons blessed by renewed knowledge, spirits grown strong through remembered purpose. The compass needle wavered between three paths that shimmered like heat haze in the pre-dawn light. "The eastern road leads through the burial grounds," the sword sang. "There, more guardians wait to be awakened. The western path crosses the sites of ancient battles, where fallen warriors might be called to our cause. But the northern road," the blade's song grew heavy with warning. "That way leads to deeper powers." The compass face rippled like disturbed water, showing her glimpses of what waited along each path. In the east, she saw ancestors stirring in their mounds, their long sleep disturbed by the weakening of ancient wards. The western path showed her battlefields where old obligations still held strong, where the dead kept their watches despite the living's forgetfulness. But the northern road, "They gather there," the blade warned, as the compass revealed shadows moving in the spaces between worlds. "The hungry ones grow stronger, drawing power from every oath forgotten, every boundary neglected. They wait. For us." The compass needles spun again, faster now, responding to the surge of power from these ancient beings. Through its bronze face, Sigrid saw Runa preparing her own dark rituals, saw Eric gathering those who would break the last barriers for their own gain. The time for preparation was growing short. "We must split our forces," Sigrid announced, her transformed voice carrying to both living and dead. "The boundaries must be strengthened on all sides before we can face what waits in the north." The compass guided her as she divided her army. Her father would lead the living warriors east, awakening the burial grounds with renewed ceremonies. The spirits of fallen heroes would take the western road, gathering their scattered brothers and sisters from ancient battlefields. And Sigrid herself. "The northern road is yours to walk," the sword sang. You who were forged in death's fire, you who stand between worlds, only you can face what waits there. The compass face darkened as she turned north, its needle trembling as it pointed toward increasing chaos. Through its power, she could see the spirit roads ahead, twisting like smoke in wind, reality growing thin where the hungry ones pressed against ancient barriers. Remember what you have become, the blade counseled as her allies departed on their assigned paths. You are no longer merely weapon or warrior, but a boundary incarnate. In you, the powers of order and chaos meet and find balance. The compass, impulsed in her grip, synchronizing with her transformed flesh, with the blade's song, with the very essence of what she had been remade to be. Each step along the spirit road brought new awareness of her nature, part human, part something else, forged by betrayal and sacrifice into a force that could walk between all worlds and belong to none. They will test you, the sword warned. The hungry ones will offer you power, vengeance, restoration of what was lost. But remember, you have already been remade into something they cannot comprehend. The compass needle steadied, pointing true north along a road that seemed to fade, into shadows and mist. Ahead lay creatures of ancient hunger, powers that had waited centuries to break their bonds. Behind her, her allies traveled their own spirit roads, gathering strength for the final confrontation. Sigrid took her first step onto the northern path, feeling reality thin around her. The compass glowed brighter, its light pushing back shadows that sought to overwhelm the spirit road. She was the blade that would cut through lies, the forge that would remake broken bonds, the compass that would guide both living and dead back to their true purpose. The village gate key materialized in Sigrid's hand as she approached the settlement, its ancient iron singing with memories of countless comings and goings. To her transformed sight, the key revealed more than mere physical barriers. It showed her the layers of wards and boundaries that had once protected the village, now grown thin as autumn ice. They feel you coming, the blade whispered. Both, the guilty and the innocent. Through the key's power, she saw the village as it truly was, a web of old magic barely holding together, its weakened strands pulsing with the footsteps of those who had forgotten their purpose as guardians. At the gate itself, Eric stood with his chosen warriors, their weapons catching the last light of day. Behind them, Runa waited in the shadows of the great hall, surrounded by dark energies that writhed like serpents. The key remembers what they forgot, the sword sang. Show them. Sigrid raised the ancient iron key, letting its song harmonize with her blade's voice. The metal's melody carried across the village, making every lock, every hinge, every nail and binding ring out in response. The sound brought villagers to their doors, drew their eyes to her transformed figure approaching. Through the evening mist, "The dead woman returns," Eric called out, but his voice wavered. The key's song had awakened something in the village's very foundations, memories of what this place had once been, what it was meant to be. "I return," Sigrid answered, her voice carrying harmonics that made mortal bones shiver. "But not as you left me." The key pulsed in her grip as she approached the gate. Through its power, she saw the truth of this barrier, not just wood and iron, but one of the anchor points where her ancestors had bound this world to ordered reality. The gate had never been meant merely to keep raiders out, but to hold chaos at bay. "Look well," she commanded, and the key's song rose higher, forcing both sight and memory on those gathered. "See what you've forgotten." The key's magic rippled outward, showing them what she could see, the weakened wards, the fraying boundaries, the hungry darkness gathering where ancient bindings had been neglected. She watched understanding dawn on faces that had once condemned. Watched fear of her transform into fear of what their willful ignorance had nearly unleashed. "Witchcraft!" Runa spat, emerging from the shadows with darkness coiling around her like smoke. "More proof of your corruption." But the key's song caught even Runa's words, revealing the bitter irony in them. Through its power, everyone present could see the true corruption, the dark energies Runa had courted, thinking to replace old obligations with new power, the bargains she had made with things that should have remained bound. "I am what your betrayal made me," Sigrid answered, taking another step forward. The key flared brighter, its light catching on her transformed flesh like sunrise on new-forged steel. "Forged in the fire you lit, quenched in the waters of death's own realm, tempered by powers older than your fear." The gate trembled as she approached, ancient wood and iron, recognizing her authority. The key's song reached a crescendo, forcing truth through layers of willful forgetfulness. Villagers fell to their knees as generations of suppressed memory surfaced. The true purpose of their settlement, the sacred trust they had abandoned, the price of their neglect. "Stand aside," Sigrid commanded, and her voice held the weight of every oath ever sworn at this threshold. "Or stand against what you were meant to guard." Eric's warriors stepped back, their weapons lowering. They had seen enough through the Key's revelations to know that their true enemies were not the transformed woman before them, but the chaos their own leaders had invited. Only Runa remained defiant, dark power gathering around her like storm clouds. "They promised us freedom," she snarled, "freedom from old bonds, from ancient duties, the power to choose our own destiny." "They lied," Sigrid answered simply, and lifted the key to the gate. Its song became a pure note of revelation, showing them all what waited beyond the weakened boundaries, the hungry ones gathering, ready to devour everything, starting with those who had broken their oaths. The village gate swung open at her touch, not just to admit her, but to acknowledge what she had become, not merely a returned exile, but the physical embodiment of their abandoned purpose, come to call them back to their true duty. The Dawnbreaker. Horn hung at Sigrid's side, its ancient surface reflecting neither light nor shadow, but something in between. This was no mere signal horn, like the one that had called warriors to battle. This was one of the first tools her ancestors had used to establish the boundaries between worlds, its voice capable of strengthening or shattering the veils that separated ordered reality from chaos. "The time comes," the blade whispered. "They gather on both sides." Through the horn's power, Sigrid saw the forces arraying themselves across the village square. Behind her stood those who had remembered their purpose, living warriors with renewed knowledge of ancient rites, dead guardians drawn back to their sacred duty. Before her, Runa had assembled her own followers, their forms twisted by the dark powers they had embraced. And above them all, the sky itself seemed to fold inward as things that had waited centuries pressed against weakening barriers. "Sound the horn," the sword sang. "Call the final battle to its beginning." Sigrid lifted the Dawnbreaker to her lips, and its voice rang out across multiple worlds at once. The sound pierced through layers of reality, forcing everything to show its true nature. Runa's followers revealed themselves as half-consumed vessels for hungry powers. The village's ancient foundations blazed with remembered purpose. The very air grew thick with the weight of competing forces. "You cannot." "Stop what comes!" Runa snarled, her voice distorted by the entities speaking through her. "The old boundaries were chains. We will be free, free to be devoured," Sigrid answered, the horn's song harmonizing with her transformed voice. "Look what your freedom has brought." The horn's continuing note made it impossible to hide truth. Behind lies, everyone present saw the cost of broken oaths. The hungry ones weren't offering power, but oblivion. Every barrier breached, every duty abandoned, had only fed their strength. The battle began not with clash of steel, but with collision of powers. Runa's followers launched attacks that rippled through multiple realities, dark energy crackling from their weapons. But Sigrid's allies knew how to fight on all levels now, physical blades striking in concert with spiritual force, living and dead warriors moving as one. The Dawnbreaker horn sang out again, its voice reinforcing the ancient boundaries even as they fought. Where its sound reached, reality grew more solid, forcing chaos back into its proper sphere. But Runa had powers of her own, drawing on bargains made with things that hungered for disorder. You speak of duty, she cried, gathering shadow around her like a cloak. I speak of power. Show them, my masters. Show them true strength. The sky split open. Through the rent in reality, things that had no right name began to emerge. But Sigrid had been remade for this moment, forged in death's fire to stand at the boundaries. The horn's song rose to meet the invasion, its voice joining with her blade's harmony to hold the line between worlds. Remember, she called to the villagers who still stood uncertain. Remember what we were meant to guard against. The horn's power forced memory through generations of willful forgetting. They saw at last what their ancestors had sworn to contain, what lurked beyond the ordered worlds, waiting to unmake everything they knew. Understanding brought renewal of purpose, and even those who had doubted felt ancient oaths stirring in their blood. Reality itself seemed to hang in balance as the battle raged across multiple planes of existence. Physical weapons struck at spiritual forces, transformed flesh met otherworldly power. Oathbreakers faced the consequences of their choices. The Dawnbreaker horn sang through it all, its voice the anchor point around which the struggle turned. Sigrid moved through the chaos like iron flowing into a perfect mold, her transformed nature allowing her to fight on all levels at once. The blade guided her strikes, showing her where the veils were thinnest, where reality needed reinforcement. The horn's song gave power to every blow, turning each strike into an act of restoration. The boundaries must be remade, the swords sang as they fought. Not just held, but forged anew. Understanding bloomed in Sigrid's transformed flesh. She had been remade not just as a weapon of justice, but as a living foundation stone. Through her, through the horn's song and the blade's power, new boundaries could be established, stronger than before, rooted in renewed understanding and restored purpose. The Peaceweaver's crown materialized above the chaos of battle, its ancient gold neither solid nor spirit, but something in between. Through ages past, it had been worn by those who maintained harmony between worlds. Now it hung in the air like a question, waiting to see if order could be restored to chaos. The crown demands balance, the blade whispered. All power has its price. Through the crown's magic, Sigrid saw the true cost of what must be done. The hungry ones could be bound again, the boundaries restored, but it would require more than mere victory. It would demand transformation, not just of her, but of all who would survive this twilight moment. Your bargain was false, she called. To Runa, who writhed at the center of darkness made manifest. But I offer a true one. The crown's light caught on her transformed flesh, showing what she had become, not just weapon or warrior, but a bridge between states of being. The Pathmaker, the Boundary Walker, forged in betrayal's fire to become betrayal's answer. They promised power, Runa screamed, her voice distorted by the entities speaking through her. Freedom from old chains. Look what that freedom has wrought, Sigrid answered, as the crown's power forced truth through layers of deception. Everyone present saw the hungry ones for what they truly were, not deliverers of power, but devourers of all existence, using Runa and her followers as mere tools to break the last barriers. The crown's light intensified, revealing the choice that hung before them. Through its power, Sigrid understood what she must offer, not destruction, but transformation, not vengeance, but a new kind of justice. Join us, she said, extending her hand to those who had followed Runa, not as slaves to old ways or new chaos, but as knowing guardians. See what I have become. Understanding comes with a price, but it brings true power, not freedom from duty, but freedom through it. The crown's radiance touched each person present, showing them glimpses of what they could become. Not transformed as completely as Sigrid, but changed enough to walk knowingly between worlds, to serve as conscious guardians rather than ignorant inheritors. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by understanding. Others stepped forward, accepting the offer of transformation. Even Eric, who had participated in her condemnation, saw at last the true nature of power and responsibility. But Runa refused. drawing her borrowed power around her like armor. "You offer chains disguised as choice." "No," Sigrid answered, as the crown's light met her blade's song in perfect harmony. "I offer the truth you forgot. Boundaries exist not to imprison, but to define. Without them nothing can exist, not freedom, not power, not even self." The crown descended slowly, its magic weaving with Sigrid's transformed nature. She understood now that this was what she had been remade for, not merely to defeat chaos, but to establish a new order, one built on conscious choice rather than inherited ignorance. The final battle happened on multiple levels at once. Physical weapons struck at spiritual barriers, transformed flesh met otherworldly power, and through it all, the crown's light offered choice after choice. Each person present had to decide, to embrace understanding with its price, or to fall with the hungry ones they had served. Runa fought to the last, channeling power that consumed her even as she wielded it. But in the end, faced with the crown's inexorable truth, even she had to choose. Her scream of defiance became a wail of understanding as she saw at last what her rebellion had truly served. The crown's power reached its peak as Sigrid spoke the words of binding, not the old formulas of containment, but new ones born of her transformed understanding. The hungry ones fought against their renewed imprisonment, but these boundaries were different. They were living boundaries, maintained by conscious choice and willing sacrifice. When it was done, when the last barrier had been restored and the last choice made, the crown settled onto Sigrid's brow, not as a symbol of rulership, but as a mark of responsibility. She had been forged as a weapon of justice, but she would continue as a builder of bridges, a maintainer of necessary boundaries. The price of peace was transformation, the end of comfortable ignorance, the beginning of conscious guardianship. The village would never again forget its purpose, for that purpose was now written in the transformed flesh of its people. The future sight stone gleamed in the morning light, its polished surface reflecting more than mere images. Ancient seers had used such stones to glimpse what might be, to guide their people along the safer paths through time. Now it showed Sigrid visions of what her transformation had wrought and what was yet to come. "The boundaries hold," the blade whispered, its song gentler now that the great battle was done. "But they require tending." Through the stone's power, she saw her village as it was becoming, a place where the old ways and new understanding had found balance. The transformed villagers went about their daily tasks, but with opened eyes and renewed purpose. Children played in the square, but now they could see the spirit lights that danced around ancient markers. Warriors trained with weapons that sang with their own voices, learning to guard both physical and supernatural boundaries. "Show me," she asked the stone, "what my fire forging has kindled." The stone's surface rippled, revealing scenes from across the northern lands. Other communities were awakening to their forgotten purposes, sparked by tales of what had happened here. The hunger for power without price was being replaced by appreciation for duty freely chosen. The boundaries between worlds were being maintained not through blind obligation, but through conscious understanding. In her father's forge, now expanded and renewed, apprentices learned to hear the songs of metal, not as mere crafters, but as knowing shapers of items that could bridge multiple worlds. The old knowledge was growing, changing, becoming something new under the guidance of those who had been transformed. "Your burning was a beginning," the sword sang softly. "Others will come, seeking to understand their own transformations." The stone showed her these seekers, men and women touched by powers they didn't understand, communities facing challenges from beyond normal reality. They would come to learn from the village that had found a new way to maintain ancient boundaries, led by the woman who had been forged in death's fire to become something more than human. But the stone showed dangers too, other forces stirring in the world's dark places, different bargains being struck by those who hadn't learned from Runa's fate. The hungry ones remained bound, but they were not the only powers that threatened the boundaries between ordered existence and chaos. The work continues, Sigrid murmured, watching ripples of possible futures spread across the stone's surface. Her transformed flesh caught the morning light like forged metal, a constant reminder of what she had become. Not victim or mere avenger, but a living bridge between states of being. The future sight stone offered one final vision, her own path. Ahead, walking between worlds, teaching others to maintain the boundaries that made existence possible. She would be teacher, guardian, and reminder of what happened when sacred trusts were abandoned. Her story would become part of the new knowledge, a tale of death and rebirth that taught the price and purpose of true power. The blade hummed at her side, its song now permanently twined with her own transformed essence. Together they would continue, not just as weapon and wielder, but as voices for those trapped between states of being, guides for those learning to walk the boundaries between worlds. Dawn's light caught the stone's surface, and in its depths Sigrid saw herself as others would know her. The woman forged in death's fire, the blade that speaks truth, the guardian of boundaries. Not quite human anymore, but something necessary, a being shaped by betrayal and sacrifice into exactly what her people needed. The future Sightstone's visions faded as morning fully arrived, leaving her with understanding of what lay ahead. There would be more battles, more choices, more transformations. But now they would be faced with open eyes and willing hearts by people who understood that maintaining the boundaries between worlds was not a burden, but the very thing that made all other freedoms possible. Sigrid stepped into the new day, ready to begin again, not as the blacksmith's daughter who heard the songs of steel, but as something forged in betrayal's fire and tempered by truth's touch, walking the boundaries between what was and what would be.